On my far left, let me introduce the head table, is Michelle Lubin. Michelle is partner and chief operating officer of Saks Media Group. Michelle has been with Saks Media for 18 years of the company's 20-year history. And the first 2 years were a little bumpy, but after that, she straightened it out and it was doing gangbusters. Michelle specializes in campaigns that moves people to action. She's done award-winning campaigns for low public adoption and connect veterans to various critical services. Michelle was named the top woman in PR nationally in 2015 by PR News.
Wow, congratulations.
You'll hear from more thorough introduction on Kirtley as well in just a moment. But I also have on my far right, your far left, John Beck. John retired in 2012 after 30 years with national marketing and sales for the U.S. Chemical, a division of SC Johnson Company of Racine, Wisconsin. He moved his family from Atlanta to Tallahassee in 1999 to make a quality of life change. John's work ethic, dedication, and sense of humor are hallmarks of his personality, and is actually a chief volunteer at Florida Tech Club. So he interviewed me for 2.5 to 3 hours before he accepted the job. I kind of passed, I guess. So welcome, John, to the club. To his left, and to your right, is Robert Weiss. Robert is the Executive Vice President for Florida Tax Watch and Special Counsel to the President CEO. He's worked with taxes for nearly a decade. I remember when he probably worked in more than a year, but it's worked out quite well. During which time he's testified as a policy expert for the legislature. I can't say how many, probably hundreds of times, on important policy issues. He's also overseen our efforts to defend or challenge things before the Florida Supreme Court. We're 7 for 7, and he's 2 for 2 in that regard. So it's a pretty good batting average, isn't it, Justice Party? Pretty good to be 7 for 7 on that. Robert's 2 for 2. His efforts to coordinate the work of tax officers to improve government efficiency, improve accountability, enhance effectiveness, and he served in various roles prior to that: research analyst, director of communications, director of research, and vice president of research before being promoted to lead the research team and coordinate with our development team. Again, my immediate right is Carol Woodward. Carol received a political science degree from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee and an economics degree from Florida State University. After retiring in the 1980s, she did volunteer work to travel, and she also managed personal investments since the early 1970s. She's got a pretty good portfolio. So please welcome the head table. Now for our main entree. John Kirtley is the co-founder of 2 private equity firms based in Tampa. His current firm, KLH Capital, invests in management buyouts of smaller middle market companies. So there's quite good knowledge of economics. For several years, he's been working in the cause of parental choice in education reform. I happened to meet him, I think it was 1999, or I think it was when we first began working on this effort. In 1988, he created a Children's Scholarship Fund in Tampa Bay and partnered with a national organization. Children's Scholarship Fund provided privately funded scholarships for lower-income children to attend K-8 schools of their choice. In 3 months with little publicity, the program received 12,500 applications for 750 scholarships. There's obviously this great pent-up demand there. He is the former president of Children First America and former director of the American Education Reform Foundation, both national school choice advocacy groups. He is currently vice chairman of the American Federation for Children, a national nonprofit that works to pass, implement, and defend parental choice laws across the country. Now, we know John has a particular point of view, and I think it's important. We've had other views that have promoted the importance of public education owned and operated by government entities directly. So it's good to hear both sides, and I know John to be a very, very honest, responsible, and respectful individual, and has done a phenomenal job to advance in the well-being of tens of hundreds of thousands of kids. In 2001 Florida legislative session, he helped fight for a new law that gives corporations tax credits for donating to scholarship organizations that help lower-income children attend schools of their choice. This program currently enrolls roughly 80,000 children. He's currently chairman of Step Up for Students, which administers scholarships under this law. He's also a member of the board of Florida Tax Watch, Florida Charter School Alliance, the Hillsborough Education Foundation, and the James Madison Institute. He's married and has 2 daughters. Please welcome John Kirtley.
Thank you so much, Dominic. And I must admit that when I accepted this invitation, I had not yet reviewed your list of previous speakers. And I almost backed out when I saw it. You have not heard of me, most of you, but I hope you find what I have to say interesting today. I'd like to begin by asking a simple question, and that is, what is public education? And usually when I ask that question, I get a pretty simple answer. And that's, well, John, it's the public schools. And when I came up in the public schools in Iowa and after that in Florida, that answer probably sufficed. But is that simple answer adequate for today? Is what I would call the old definition of public education adequate? What's the old definition in my mind? Raising taxpayer dollars and handing all the dollars over to the school districts. The school districts run all the schools in a fairly uniform manner, and then we assign children by their zip code. That was public education. And it worked incredibly well for over 100 years for almost all children. It worked incredibly well for me. I got an amazing education in Iowa and at Fort Lauderdale High School. But Florida is an incredibly diverse state today. Did you know that in the Miami-Dade public schools, over 100 languages are spoken? That's incredible. And in addition to ethnic diversity, if you drive from Coral Gables to Overtown, you'll see the incredible economic diversity and disparity. Now, with that level of diversity, is a one-size-fits-all, top-down system where we assign kids by their zip code, is that going to produce excellence for every single child? I'm not sure that it is. But fortunately, Florida is a leader, probably the leader in the country, in moving towards what I would call a new definition of public education, and that is this: raising taxpayer dollars to educate children, and then letting parents direct those dollars to different providers and even different delivery methods that best suit their individual children's learning needs. And we are so fortunate that we have districts, school districts in our state, that are leaders in the country at moving towards this new definition. Where I come from in Hillsborough, we have magnet schools. You may have heard of them. These magnet schools are schools run by the district, but chosen by parents, and they have a unique curriculum or unique environment. In Hillsborough, we have an amazing arts magnet called Blake High School. Incredible. Send kids to Broadway right after high school. We also have an incredible robotics program at another high school. I'm very proud to have donated to and raised money for 2 single-gender middle schools in Hillsborough, which are incredible. They take kids from the poorest backgrounds, and both of them are A schools. We also now have what are called charter schools. You may have heard of those. Charter schools are simply schools of choice run by a private organization under a contract with the school district. I'm very proud to have donated to and fundraised for a charter school in my district in the southeast corner of Hillsborough. It's very rural there. And there's a K-8 school in the farmland there that's run by a nonprofit that's worked with migrant workers for over 50 years. And about 15 years ago, they realized they knew this population so well, they should start a school for the kids. Incredible school, A-rated school. They take kids that are 2 years behind or more with little English and teach them very, very well. We have districts like Lee County that have been experimenting with open enrollment for over a decade. In Lee County, if there's room at a school, a parent in Lee County can send his kid to any public school in the district, if there's room. And of course, parents in the neighborhood get priority. We now have teaching with taxpayer funds over the internet in Florida. In fact, Florida is the leader in virtual schooling. We have something called the Florida Virtual School, which is an incredible organization that offers hundreds of courses over the internet, funded by taxpayer dollars. Districts offer their own programs of virtual learning, often under contracts with for-profit companies. Now, imagine that you're a kid in high school in a rural district, and you want to learn Mandarin. It's probably not a Mandarin teacher at your high school, right? But you can take Mandarin and learn it very effectively through the Florida Virtual School. It's a wonderful thing. We have dual enrollment. That's where kids in high school take classes at the same time at their local high school and at the local community college or college with taxpayer funding, and they get ahead. We now even have programs where parents with children who have special needs can get money from the taxpayers directly from the state treasury and send their children to private schools. We have a program called the McKay Scholarship Program and another one called the Gardner Scholarship Program, both named after former Senate presidents. And these programs serve roughly almost 40,000 children with special needs, with, again, money from the Treasury going to private, mainly faith-based schools. We now have parents actually customizing their own children's education to an incredible degree, combining delivery methods and providers at the same time. And my favorite example to use in this regard is the son of the gentleman who runs our nonprofit in Tampa, who, by the way, is the former president of the Pinellas Teachers Union. When his son was a senior in high school, this is a few years ago, here was his first semester senior year. 2 classes at his zoned regular public high school, 2 classes over the internet through the Florida Virtual School, and 2 classes at St. Pete College, all funded by the taxpayers, all at the same time. That is the future of public education, in my opinion. Now, understand this. Right now, over 1/3 of the kids in Florida funded by the taxpayers in K-12 do not attend their traditional zoned public schools, over 1/3. In Dade County, that figure is over 50%. And I applaud the districts who are moving towards this new definition. The superintendent in Dade is outstanding. He is probably the best in the country at providing leadership and creating these options. I celebrate them for moving away from this uniformity. Now, I want you to imagine that you are a poor, single mom in a low-income neighborhood in Jacksonville. You have a 7th grade son who is going the wrong direction. He's failing all his classes. It's not his school's fault, his zone school. It's a great public school. And I'm the first to say that anyone who teaches in any public school, but certainly a public school in an urban environment, is a hero. It's just not the right fit for her son, and he's going the wrong direction. She knows it, and she's desperate. Now, on her street, in her neighborhood, there's a school called Potter's House Christian Academy. It's a real school. K-12 school, low-income neighborhood, 95% graduation rate, over 90% go on to higher education or the military. Wouldn't you want the ability to send your kid to that school? What if you could save taxpayers money by doing so? The tuition's $5,000, less than half of what we spend in Duval educating children in the public school system. I believe poor parents must be empowered to choose the right environment for their children, no matter who runs it. But understand this, I am not a private school advocate. I don't think that private schools are better than public schools. I work with individual public schools. I've given more money to individual public schools than I have individual private schools. I just strongly believe that low-income parents have to be empowered to choose whatever environment's going to work to prevent their child from becoming a statistic. There are some children who will only make it. I've talked to them, maybe you've talked to them. There are some children who will only make it if they're able to go to a school that has the environment that perhaps a faith-based school does. If not, they will be a statistic. In 2001, the Florida legislature did something to help parents and children like this. They created the tax credit scholarship program. Under this program, companies can donate to a state-approved nonprofit and get a tax credit for doing so against certain state taxes. Low-income parents apply to the nonprofit, and income is the only criteria. And if they get a scholarship, they can use that scholarship to either pay for transportation to an out-of-district public school or to pay for tuition to a private school of their choice. Most of them use the latter. Today, as Dominic mentioned, there are 80,000 children on the program. The average household income of the program is $25,000 for a household of 4. 30% of the children are African American, 35% are Latino. 60% come from single-parent homes. They are the poorest performers in the public schools when they leave. We know that because we have their test scores when they leave and also when they're in the program. They are the worst performers in their public schools. When they come on the program, they turn around. By law, they must take either the state assessment or a nationally recognized standardized test approved by the DOE, and the scores must be reported to Florida State, right here, every year. And every year, Florida State issues a report on the learning gains of the kids down to the private school level. Once on the program, the kids in the program make learning gains equal to children of all incomes, including high-income children. It's turning them around, as we had hoped. What really encourages me, though, is the research has shown that the more a public school has kids come on this program, the bigger the learning gains for the children who remain in that public school. Understand what I'm saying? This program is helping the academic performance of the public schools. Now, we can't prove why, but if I had to guess, if you're taking the 2 hardest case kids out of a classroom, the teacher's job probably gets easier. It's also helping the taxpayers. Because the law limits the scholarship to 80% of what the state must send to a district to educate a child, it saves the taxpayers money. OPAGA, which I probably don't have to explain what that means in this room, it's sort of the state accounting office, OPAGA has issued reports showing that this program saves the taxpayers tens of millions of dollars every year in operating costs. Now, despite the benefits to the children on the program, to the children in the public schools, and to the taxpayers, in August of 2014, the Public School Teachers Union, the School Boards Association, and the state chapter of the NAACP filed a lawsuit asking the courts to shut down the program and evict the children from their schools. They did this even though the program serves less than 3% of the kids in the K-12 system. They did this even though the program serves or uses less than 2% of the state K-12 budget. One of their legal claims is that the program violates what's called the Blaine Amendment, which deals with the separation of church and state in our state constitution, because the children can choose faith-based schools. Well, I would remind you that we have something called the voluntary pre-K program in Florida. In 2002, I believe, the taxpayers put into our constitution that every 4-year-old gets taxpayer-funded pre-K. Well, 30,000 kids take money directly from the Treasury and use it to pay for tuition at faith-based pre-K, often at the same schools of the kids on this program. We also have a program called Bright Futures, college scholarships. Students take money directly from the Treasury and use it to pay tuition at faith-based colleges, including 3 of the 4 historically black colleges in our state. Near me in Lakeland, Southeastern University, wonderful college, or university, their charter says that we will prepare Christ-centered young men and women to enter the world. And I can't remember the rest, but all I know is that's a faith-based school right there. Have the plaintiffs challenged these 2 programs? No. The plaintiffs also make a claim that this program, the tax credit scholarship program, is not uniform or not the same as the traditional public schools. But didn't we just talk about how we're moving to this new definition where there are all these new forms of education? Is uniformity really the principle around which we want to organize public education in this new century? Have the plaintiffs targeted virtual learning or dual enrollment, charters or magnets, which are not uniform? No, they have not. No, they've only targeted the program that only serves low-income children who are doing very poorly in their assigned schools. Should they succeed, 80,000 children will be evicted from schools that are working for them. But they're not the only ones that will suffer. Districts, school districts, and taxpayers will suffer. 80,000 children will return to the public schools in a day. There's no other way for them to pay the tuition. We have 20,000 kids in Dade County, and they're concentrated. They're not spread out. In 2 zip codes in Orange County, in Orlando, 2 contiguous zip codes, we have 2,000 kids on this program. It will show up in one day. That's 4 or 5 elementary schools. I read the paper last week, and the superintendent of Osceola County Public Schools was lamenting the fact that they have to create 5,000 new spaces over the next 5 years, and how difficult that's going to be. In fact, the quote was, from the article, "The county hopes new charter schools will enroll some of the students and ease the strain on traditional schools." Ladies and gentlemen, we have 3,000 children on this scholarship program in Osceola County. If the superintendent is worried about absorbing 5,000 over the next 5 years, how will he absorb 3,000 in one day? Yes, if the plaintiffs win, there will be fiscal and operational chaos in the districts. Where does the case stand? Well, we won the first round. District Court Judge George Reynolds threw out the case, saying that the plaintiffs did not have the legal right or standing to bring the lawsuit because he couldn't see how they were harmed. And interestingly, that's the same exact reasoning that the U.S. Supreme Court used when they threw out a case, an almost identical case, with an almost identical program from Arizona a couple years ago. Indeed, no state Supreme Court has ever found a tax credit scholarship unconstitutional. And I'm not a constitutional lawyer, I'm not even a lawyer, but I can see the ramifications for our state should this program be found unconstitutional. If it's found to violate the Blaine Amendment, how cannot VPK and Bright Futures do the same? That money comes directly from the Treasury, where this money never reaches the Treasury. If the program is found to violate uniformity, how does not charter schools and the McKay program and the Gardner program, dual enrollment, virtual schooling? If you think that these risks to Florida's innovation in education are theoretical, think again. Because in addition to this lawsuit, there's also another lawsuit where plaintiffs are charging that the state does not spend enough on K-12 education. And I have no opinion on that. But in that lawsuit, the plaintiffs have said that charter schools and the McKay program violate the uniformity provision and are unconstitutional. Is public education in this new century only district schools with kids assigned by zip codes? Should, as the plaintiffs demand, the tax credit scholarship program, McKay scholarships, and charter schools be outlawed? Will we set legal precedents that render VPK, Bright Futures, virtual learning unconstitutional? Will Florida relinquish its leadership in educational innovation? Obviously, I hope not. There's a growing sense, a growing understanding of where this particular lawsuit sits in the context of history. The lawsuit, I think, has helped draw some clear moral lines in this issue of educational opportunity for low-income families. There's now a formal coalition of over 100 of the most prominent African-American ministers in our state who have come out to denounce this lawsuit. There's an identical coalition of over 100 Latino ministers. And in January of this year, the day after the Martin Luther King holiday, over 10,000 scholarship parents and children traveled all the way to our capital, some from as far away as Miami. They came the day after the MLK holiday to hear his son lead them in a protest against this lawsuit. And I'd like to play you just a 90-second video to give you a sense of that day.
My dad told us a lot of things. He used to say that the ultimate measure of a human being is not where one stands in times of comfort and convenience, but where one stands in times of challenge and controversy. We do live in a great country. And it is wonderful that people have come from all over this state. But ultimately, if the courts have to decide, the courts will be on the side of justice, because this is about justice. This is about righteousness. This is about truth. This is about freedom. The freedom to choose what's best for your family and your child, most importantly. And I look forward to the day of victory. Drop the suit. Drop the suit. Drop the suit. Drop the suit.
I wonder, in 20, 30, 40 years, how will images like this be viewed? How will this lawsuit be viewed? Will you be asked what side you're on? What will your reply be? Before he was killed, shortly before, Dr. King said this. He said, "It is not malicious acts of bad people that will do us in, but the silence and indifference of good people." And on this critical subject, I hope you good people will not be silent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Two big suits that have tremendous implications, both for education, for parents, for students, for the vitality of the Sunshine State, and obviously also for taxpayers. And that is this direct suit on the choice programs, which if 80,000 students coming in, it's a multi-million-dollar impact on the schools. The advocacy lawsuit, trying to understand that, will also be my answer to some questions I'm not taking into account. The advocacy lawsuit could cost somewhere, if we were to lose that, if we go to the middle average, just to the middle per student average, it's about $3 billion response.
Per year.
Per year.
Yeah.
And if we go to the upper 12 states, or 10, 12 states, it's about $70 billion. Just kind of get a wrap your head around that. So, at any rate, these are good times. These are healthy times for a good discussion. Where are we? Where do we want to go? How do we make sure that we provide the best education for our kids in ways that are sustainable? So, questions from the audience, first and only from our members.
Okay, I have a question. What is the purpose of the lawsuit? Is it that teachers want all of the students in public schools?
I cannot speak for their motivations. I can only speak for what they say in their filings, their court filings. And their court filings say that we object to this program because it violates both they believe, the Blaine Amendment and the uniformity clause in our state constitution. But again, I ask the question, if that is the motivation, why have they not filed lawsuits against VPK, Bright Futures, McKay, and Gardner? These are more, I don't believe our program is guilty of these violations at all, but if they are, the programs where the money comes directly from the Treasury are more guilty. So why have they not filed a suit against them? I cannot speak for their motivations. And I should have mentioned, I apologize, that we estimate that the cost, you talk about cost, Dominic, that if even half of the kids, the 80,000 kids, we have to build new spaces for them, which I think is incredibly optimistic. I think it's going to be you have to build spaces for most of them. But if it's even half, it's going to cost $2 billion. Yes, sir.
John, I'm of the belief that we've made tremendous progress in the last quarter century with public education. You seem to agree with that.
I do.
Some of your comments. And that progress has been measured by standards. Folks across the globe measure that in things like our virtual schools and things like our reading level of our fourth graders and stuff like that. Have you been able to evaluate the impact of this portion of public education outlay to the factors of success in that regard? And we're new members. I think of what we have done in this regard around the country has been replicated on several levels. And Florida's actually, many Floridians they diss our education system, but others are really trying to emulate that. Is that not correct?
It is correct. And first, let me say that Florida has made more progress in the last, say, 15 years than almost any other state in improving the educational outcomes, particularly of low-income children and children of color. And in terms of narrowing the gap, what's called the achievement gap. And there are many studies that show that's the case. And there are many studies that talk about the reasons why, but there's really only reason why, and that's because teachers made it happen. And I believe that there are incredible people that teach in these hard to teach places. And I'm open. I'm a man who's always been open to innovation. That's why I got into this field of parental choice, because it's an area of innovation, and I'm always open to new ideas from anybody and any place, because we can't keep things off the table when it comes to these kids. Everything has to be on the table to help these kids. But you're right. I think that a lot of people don't realize the incredible job that teachers have done in our state, in our public schools, in the last 15 years.
John, and Paul tells us whatever it takes about the Harvard Children's Zone, Jeffrey Canada. I thought the most interesting point was, one of the conclusions was that once a child reached a certain age, 5th or 6th grade, no matter how much work they put into it, the amount of gain that they saw was extremely limited. And their conclusion was, if you don't get them extremely young, it takes a lot more effort, or maybe there's no amount of effort that's going to get them there. When you talk about the results of the children that came into the program in the different ages, did you see this declining effectiveness with the older the child got?
It's interesting you ask, because almost all of our children go back to public high schools. Why? Well, there just aren't that many private high schools around. The typical, we have 1,500 private schools that serve our children in this program across the state. And the typical school, I'm a public school kid. So, before I got into this movement, my image of private school was, oh, that's expensive, exclusive, leafy suburban academies. Well, that's a very small percentage of the universe of private schools, but certainly a small percentage of the schools that serve our kids. The typical school that serves a kid in this program, I've seen this profile over and over again, probably over 100 times. You'll have an educator, an incredible educator in the public school system, usually an African-American woman, and she's either been a teacher or a principal or both. She retires with full pension, and she's in her mid to late 50s. She lives in a lower income neighborhood, and she's a very active member of her church. The church has space that they use for Sunday school on Sundays. It lays fallow during the week. Parents know her as a great educator. They come to her and they beg her to start a kindergarten at the school. She says, I am retired. Do you understand what that means? And they beg and they beg. Finally, she says, okay, I'll start a kindergarten. I'll take 15 kids, but that's it. And before our program existed, the parents scrape together whatever they can, maybe $1,000 a kid, maybe less, and they start a kindergarten. And at the end of the first year, the parents say, well, you can't let go of the kids now. And she goes and gets her friend that retired with full pension, right? And now they have a K-1 school. Well, they turn around 5 years later, they have a K-4 school. And that has 80 kids. And it's in the neighborhood, and the parents have chosen to send their kids there. And look, it is a unique environment. I'm the first to admit, I probably would not have done well as a kid at an environment like that. But those kids need that environment. But back to your question, once they get to 5th, 6th grade, well, they don't have any more room at that church. And it's pretty rare to find a private high school, sometimes even a private junior high, particularly in low-income areas. So most of our kids, 90% of them, I believe, go back to public high schools. And I'm proud of that. I think we are a sort of a place that takes the hardest case kids, turns them around, and sends them back to be successful children at the public high schools, like the one I went to. So we are working with the DOE right now on a study, and then they've been very cooperative to see how these, we know how they do when they're on our program. We're now working on a study, or the DOE is, to see how they do once they go back to public high school.
I have 6 grandchildren in the Atlanta region who are homeschooled through a private school. Those grandkids who, through the 8th grade, they're home 3 days a week and in private school 2 days. And the one who's now in 9th grade, he's home 2 days in the private school 3 days. They're motivated kids who are doing well, they get a great education. The state of Georgia doesn't pay for any of that. What is the percentage of kids, if we can have such statistics, in the state of Florida that are either being homeschooled in a private school settings, and does the state of Florida provide any financing for that?
There is no financial assistance for homeschooled children in Florida. I believe the number of homeschooled children in Florida is about 70,000. I hope I don't have that number wrong. There are about 10% of the 2.8 million children in Florida who are in the K-12 years, about 10% attend a private school. And so I guess that's about 280,000 children. The number of children that receive financial assistance from the taxpayers directly from the Treasury would be 40,000 through the McKay Scholarship Program and the Gardner Scholarship Program for children with special needs. That's with money from the Treasury. And then on the tax credit scholarship program, where the money does not reach the Treasury, there are 80,000 children.
Thank you for your remarks. What do you see as the future of national education, especially in light of Common Cause and certain national dictums that are going into the education system? If you had to recreate the system for a minute, how would you structure it, particularly in the state of Florida?
Well, obviously, I am a believer that, well, let me first say that I don't worry about people that have enough money to do what's right for their kids. If you have enough money, you exercise parental choice already. You move to a neighborhood that has a public school that fits your child. In fact, most people choose their homes, what? Based on the school. Or you pay for an alternative. So I don't worry about them. I only worry about parents who don't have the means to make that choice. And so to answer your question, what I would do, I think that if we empowered every low-income parent to be able to choose the right environment for their child, regardless of who runs the school, regardless of what the delivery method is, I think if we got that one good thing right, that everything else would work out okay. It might take a while, it might be chaotic for a while, but I think in the end that will produce the best results. Why? I guess probably because I didn't come at this with a degree in education. I mean, my only experience was my mom was a public school teacher. I had no formal training in the theories of education. But I am a business person. And I think back to Germany before the wall fell. On the east side of the wall, the Berlin Wall, you had decisions about how to run the economy, all made at the top. And the allocation of resources was all made at the top. The people at the top decided, what kind of cars to make, how many cars to make every year. Good intentioned people. And on the east side of the wall, they produced a car, I think it was called the Brabant, maybe. It wasn't of great quality. On the west side of the wall, how was the economy organized? Well, end users allocated the resources. And on that side of the wall, you have BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, Volkswagen, others. I think that it's just too hard, even if you have the best people, it's just too hard to manage a huge system from the top down and allocate resources that way. And if parents were empowered to choose in this way, I think it would be better for teachers, I think it would be better for principals, I think it would be better for students.
Would you do it with tax incentives through government, or what? How do you see it?
We currently raise over $20 billion a year in Florida to educate children in the K-12 years. I honestly don't know if that's the right number. But it could be higher. I don't know. I guess a judge may tell us soon. But I do wish that at least low-income parents were able to direct more of that number, that $20 billion number right now.
Any other questions? John, I have one for you.
Sure.
It's actually not in the K-12 area, but it's post-secondary. We've had for a long time the Florida Resident Access Grant, which provides ranges from time to time, $2,800 to $3,600. The money follows the student, and it helps reduce some of the pressures on the public universities by sending money to accredited private colleges and universities such as Barry, St. Thomas, and a number of other facilities, University of Miami and others. How does that fit into the mix of this question?
I believe that under FRAG, students can take those dollars, which come directly from the Treasury, I might add, and pay tuition at places like Palm Beach Atlantic University, Southeastern University, 3 of the 4 historically black colleges. All the colleges I just mentioned are faith-based. If this program, the tax credit program, where the money never reaches the Treasury, is ruled unconstitutional, is ruled to violate the Blaine Amendment, FRAG is certainly unconstitutional and will be knocked down.
Interesting. Let's hear it for John.
Thank you. Thank you.
As a token of our sincere appreciation for your time, but also expression of your important thoughts, we'd like to present you with this limited edition bronze eagle sculpture created by locally and nationally recognized artist Stanley Proctor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. We're now adjourned.